but a lot of showers will keep coming in across Scotland and Northern Ireland. It will be a cooler night, certainly across the south. Temperatures down into single figures, staying at 9 or 10 across towns and cities further north, where there will still be a pretty strong wind blowing. A blustery day then on Thursday, not as windy as today, but some good spells of sunshine to come tomorrow for most of southern England, the Midlands, eastern England and much of eastern Scotland. The day is going to be dry and bright, but further west there will be a lot of showers coming in, parts of Wales, especially Northern Ireland and western Scotland. Still breezy, as I said, so again feeling cooler than these temperatures would suggest, but generally a little bit milder on Thursday compared to today, and staying gusty with further wet weather slipping south on Friday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, live from the Conservative Party conference here in Birmingham. We've got a stellar show for you today, exploring all of the ins and outs of Conservative Party conference, the ups and downs, and what is to come for this party at a turbulent time in British politics. We've got some stellar guests for you as well, all to come after the headlines, so we'll catch you in a couple of minutes' time.
A very good morning, 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. The Prime Minister will say the disruption caused by her plan to grow the economy will be worth it when she addresses Conservative Party members. In her first conference speech as leader, Liz Truss will insist she has the right plans for reform, claiming the government can no longer delay efforts to boost economic growth. Well, Ms Truss will be hoping that the speech will help restore morale following a U-turn over tax. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is certainly optimistic for Truss's speech.
Whenever the Prime Minister comes to an event here at conference, huge reception, really passionate and positive reception, because people can see she is getting on with the things that she said she was going to get on with. Cutting taxes for 30 million people, investing in the UK, supporting people who are concerned about those energy price rises. So that's what the Prime Minister is focused on. The party, I think, is responding well to that as a whole, and there will always be some people that are critical, but that's politics.
Rail passengers will face more disruption to their journeys today because of another strike. This time, members of the union ASLEF and the Transport Salaried Staff Association are walking out in their long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. The ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan says industrial action will continue until the government intervenes. Police forces across England and Wales have agreed to send an officer to every home burglary. It's part of new measures to ensure more crimes are being solved and more offenders prosecuted. The National Police Chiefs Council says chief constables will work to ensure the approach is implemented as soon as is practically possible. A man accused of trying to harm the late Queen after being caught with a crossbow at Windsor Castle last Christmas is expected to enter pleas today. Jaswant Singh Charlie will appear at the Old Bailey later to face 3 charges, including an offence under the Treason Act. The 20-year-old's also charged with making a threat to kill the Queen and having a loaded crossbow in a public place. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now let's go back to the brief.
Hello and welcome to the briefing here on GB News Live from the conference floor at the Conservative Party conference here in Birmingham. And I can tell you, we are into the final day now after what has, by all accounts, been a rather turbulent time for the Tory party. We went into this conference with a Prime Minister saying she was willing to be unpopular, some people saying that she was not for turning. And yet, 24 hours into this conference, and there was a seismic U-turn, a backtrack on that cut to the 45p top rate of tax. That has overshadowed so much of this conference, but there has been so much else here too. Speeches from cabinet ministers, from senior politicians, and indeed so much on the fringe as well. Let's explore what this has meant for the party now. I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Street, the Mayor of the West Midlands, someone who has been elected now 2 times in what some people would call not the most traditional of Conservative areas. And Andy, you opened the conference with the first political speech on that stage. Has this conference gone as you'd expected?
So I think there's been 2 conferences, if I'm honest, Tom. You said that I opened the conference, and I suppose I did that as host. So from a West Midlands perspective, it's gone as I expected, because we've been able to show the government all the progress that's been made here and to say, back us through levelling up and we will deliver. That's been very good opportunity from the West Midlands. The other aspect of it, you might call it the national political debate, I accept that's been perhaps a little unexpected, a little bit more challenging, hence why I say 2 conferences at the same time. But as the host, I'm pleased the way Birmingham has presented itself to the world.
It's interesting looking at the context in which this conference is held. It's hard to think of a more challenging set of circumstances, given that this is a new government. It didn't have time really to bed itself in. There's been some enormous challenges globally in terms of the energy situation, in terms of the financial situation, interest rates around the world rising, and clearly this is a government that is finding its feet. When it comes to having a unified party, having the party faithful and indeed senior political figures in the party on side, has this been a bit of a missed opportunity to unite?
So I think you're right to pick out in your question there that actually the very first thing the government did was to respond to the energy crisis, and actually has put a lot of cash into the hands of individuals. Average semi-detached householder in this city is worth about £1,100 a year to them. We are utterly united around that. And you're right, there hasn't really been the moment for that to sink in, be understood. You might even say get the political upside from that. And we moved, you might say, too swiftly to then the whole debate about the mini budget, where we've seen a lot of debate. But putting my card very firmly on the table, before the U-turn, I called for it. The 45p, the proposed abolition of that rate, was the wrong policy, and it was correct that the government thought again about that. And you know, sometimes the braver thing to do is admit that you've got it wrong and think again. So I am very pleased that they did do that.
You've been very consistent in standing up for your wing of the party on issues like that. But I suppose there is the concern amongst some that This is a government that was just elected with a mandate from Conservative Party members, I suppose, not the country at large, but members, saying that it wanted to get down that historically high tax burden, the tax burden rising to the highest it was in 70 years. The Prime Minister saying she wanted to reduce that. Is there a worry that the Conservative Party is, to some extent on this issue, not able to govern? If the Conservative Party is something that's meant to stand for low taxes, it's not able to get it through.
Not at all, Tom. You're confusing two things there, if I may say. The principle, the big idea on which Liz Truss won the members' election of a lower tax, higher growth country, that is absolutely robust. It is actually right. The huge reductions in tax were not the 45p piece. The huge reductions in tax were around national insurance that every single worker benefits from, and of course also the corporation tax and other business taxes. That idea is still absolutely right. It was this one piece, and I will call it a political misjudgment, but it is not actually fundamental to the economic plan that has actually consumed the debate. But we get back to selling the big vision of a lower tax, higher growth economy, and that, by the way, is the only way that you can afford the public services that citizens rightly expect.
I suppose there are two different ways to view that. Yes, only £2 billion, a tiny proportion of the overall package. But from the other perspective, of course, if it's only that amount and to some extent potentially revenue neutral, if we're to believe the wilder expectations of the IFS, I suppose there are some people at this conference that thinks if the government isn't able to push forward such a simplification as that, taking back the top rate of tax to what it was under the Labour Party, is the Conservative Party losing its way?
That isn't right, actually, your question. Top rate of tax actually was higher, and then from Gordon Brown.
For 1 month.
And it was actually David Cameron's government that reduced it to what it is. Anyway, the point is, though, that was a political misjudgment. It is not essential to the economic piece. And let's just think why about this political misjudgment, because it goes to a principle and a value that I think is so important in conservatism, actually. It's about fairness. And what people just reacted to was saying, it just isn't right. Well, families are struggling, that we've got this roll of the dice that's so much in favour of the most wealthy in societies. Principle of fairness is why they had to think again, and they did. And as I say, we are relieved that they did, but it does not put in jeopardy the bigger project.
Well, let's park that conversation for now, because there is so much else going on with this government, and of course a general election 2, maybe 2.5 years away. You are one of the most well-known extra-parliamentary parts of the Conservative Party, one of these bastions of, I hate to say it, but perhaps the real country outside of the Westminster village, the Westminster bubble. What do you want to see this government championing over the next 2 years, taking forward to take that message to the wider country?
I suppose this might sound an odd way of answering your question, but I want to see them champion action. Because if I look around what's happening in this region, what people want to see is better transport, more homes. They want to see better education, so that they, and I don't, that can sound just like words, but actually what do I mean by that? Courses in colleges that are relevant to their future job opportunities. They want to see new investors coming in, providing the jobs of the future. They are all practical things. So you talk at a conference like this, like the big idea of a faster growing economy, but it's actually got to translate to things on the ground that people can see. And what I'm very clear on is this party will be judged in 2 years' time about whether it can deliver. And so the whole mission that we've been trying to explain to senior cabinet ministers is that's what we do in the West Midlands. That's what Conservatives here, working across the board sometimes with our Labour colleagues as well, actually get on and deliver. And I am a firm believer that if we do that, then the party will be rewarded.
Now, you have confounded expectations, not once but twice, in terms of being elected in this part of the country in what people might have ordinarily expected to perhaps be a more Labour-leaning region. You have delivered those electoral results and indeed governed in that way, in this executive role here in the West Midlands. To me, there seems to be a bit of pessimism here at this conference. You have sounded particularly optimistic in this conversation, but talking to activists out here on the ground, it does seem that people think that perhaps the next election is lost. Is your view that this is recoverable, that the party can turn itself around? Can the next election be run for the Conservatives?
Most definitely, yes. Now, I'm probably very lucky at this conference because I come to this conference primarily to represent this city and the wider region. And we, of course, have had a brilliant summer with the Commonwealth Games. We've got record inward investment. We've got new sectors. We're getting on with the Net Zero Challenge. So I've got a positive story to tell. But I do think that is really directly relevant to your question. The party can win if it gets that positive story. And you know what? That also means remembering some of the issues that actually brought us that coalition back in 2019. We have got to be on the right side of the climate change debate, something I'm very proud about how Conservatives have led in the West Midlands. We've got to engage in net zero. We've got to see retrofitted homes. We've got to see greener public transport. Evidence that on some of these really big calls, we're making them and delivering them. And if we do that in a united way, and that would be my other message to the party, divided parties never, ever succeed. We saw Labour presenting a very united front in Liverpool last week, and it should be a real message to us. Stop your infighting, stop your worrying about the leadership election. We've decided our leader. The only way for us now, given we've got limited time, is to back her and make sure we deliver those practical things on the ground.
A strong message. Andy Street, thank you so much for joining us here on the briefing this morning. Really appreciate your analysis, your insight and your views there. Andy Street, the Mayor of the West Midlands, here in his home turf of Birmingham. Well, before we move on to discussing some wider issues, let's turn to what the Foreign Secretary had to say this morning. James Cleverly had appeared on GB News a little bit earlier, presenting a defence of the Prime Minister in the context of this turbulent conference.
Seen whenever the Prime Minister comes to an event here at conference, huge reception, really passionate and positive reception, because people can see she is getting on with the things that she said she was going to get on with. Cutting taxes for 30 million people, investing in the UK, supporting people who are concerned about those energy price rises. So that's what the Prime Minister is focused on. The party, I think, is responding well to that as a whole, and there will always be some people that are critical, but that's politics. I think people instinctively know that the British people want to see us focused on them. They want to see us discussing how to get wage growth in the UK economy, invest in the parts of the country where they live. That's what they want us to do. I think that's what we should be focused on. I know that's what the Prime Minister is focused on, and I think you'll hear that in the speech that she's going to give a little bit later on today.
Foreign Secretary James Cleverly speaking there from the very seat I'm sitting in. For those watching on television, it might look like a bit of apparition has taken place, but no, that was recorded earlier. But James Cleverly there talking about some of the speech that the Prime Minister will be giving in just a couple of hours' time, and what a good opportunity to dive in to what this speech really does mean. Perhaps a make or break moment for the Prime Minister. I'm delighted to be joined now by Nigel Nelson, the political editor of the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People, the longest serving political editor in the lobby, if I'm not mistaken.
Indeed, this is my 37th year of coming to conference.
37th conference, my gosh. So first of all of these 37 years of conferences, how does this compare?
Probably the most chaotic and the most messy, the most difficult. Never seen a new leader come in and get such a bad time when she's got here. The only extra thing that could go wrong now would be if she got a very bad cough and bits of the stage started falling off.
Well, that harks us back to 2018, was it, when Theresa May not only got a bad cough, bits of the stage fell off, and someone went up with a P45 to offer. I suppose that is such a low bar. surely Liz Truss will surpass that. But what does she need to do in this speech? How does she need to bring this party together?
Well, she needs a miracle, first of all. And the P45 is still metaphorically out there because you've got so many MPs who are against her. And they're actively talking, those who've turned up to conference, an awful lot of them haven't. The ones who are here are actively talking about how they might get rid of her. Now, of course, that's a much more difficult process. She can't be challenged for another year under the current rules. But they're now working out how to change the rules. I mean, they're very angry. They're in despair. They feel they're heading for a general election defeat, and they also think they got the wrong leader. So it's just a question now of how they frame that. Now, she can save herself. There are things she can do. She could announce today, having U-turned on the 45p, she could announce that I will uprate benefits in line with inflation. That would get rid of another rebellion because the MPs are talking about rebelling against that. They'll certainly let the mini-budget go through now, but that's the next stage. She could also make sure that the Office of Budget Responsibility report actually says something good about the Chancellor's mid-term statement, which is coming up within a couple of weeks. So all those things, that there are ways out of it, but it does mean that she has to use up an awful lot of political capital to actually get there.
It's extraordinary that this has been such a rapid premiership. Liz Truss has only been in post for about 3 weeks, but it feels like it's been perhaps 3 years, the amount of news that has happened, the amount of policy that has been put forward, the seismic events that have taken place. I wonder, given that the old adage that a week's a long time in politics, is everyone at this conference thinking perhaps too short term? That potentially where this party is in the polls now might be a very, very different place, not only 6 months from now, but 4 times that, 2 years away from the next general election.
Well, if a week's a long time in politics, then 2 years is several centuries. So, of course, an awful lot can happen in that time. Keir Starmer may implode himself. You don't know. So the longer that she can go, I mean, I thought that she might use her bounce for a spring election. That's way off the cards now. There's no way of doing that. She's going to have to go long, which means that she's got until January 2025, the last possible date for the next election. So there is time for her to turn things round. But at the moment, it's a question of actually how she gets the confidence of both the MPs and also the markets back. Those are the 2 key things she must do. Now, there's no sign of her doing that, but she seems to stick to her guns with her general economic policy, save the 45p, which they now seem to be saying, oh, terribly minor, didn't matter, we just got rid of that. But certainly I think that the benefit uprating is now a key issue, and ideally today would be the day to address it.
It's interesting looking at what we're expecting when Parliament returns a week from now, when we're looking at perhaps 4 or 5 weeks before Christmas, where Parliament actually has time to get business done. It hasn't had much time to sit at all in the last few months. But there is an ambitious agenda that Liz Truss has hinted at of supply-side reform, of reform to migration, to planning, to childcare, to all of these issues. Given that Liz Truss has felt forced to retreat, to U-turn on the 45p rate of tax, what hope does she have for some of these really contentious elements of supply-side reform?
Well, it's the same problem. That the whole thing that she needs to get back is the confidence of MPs. Now, if MPs are actually actively talking about bringing her down one way or another, even if it causes a general election, you can see how serious the whole thing is. So the first thing is to actually calm them, and also to make sure that the markets stay stable as well. So the pound is at least recovered. The markets aren't quite so frenetic as they were a week ago. all those things would actually help her. But most importantly, it's her own troops. That, bear in mind, only a third of them ever voted for her. Probably out of those third, 50-odd were hardcore supporters and 50-odd wanted jobs. So at the moment, there is actually a realistic chance of MPs finding a way of bringing their preferred choice back, which is, of course, Rishi Sunak.
Rishi Sunak did not get a majority of Conservative MPs. In many ways, the leadership election was peculiar in that there was no standout.
Well, when it came to the parliamentary side of it, obviously the view always was that if Liz Truss made the final two, the membership would vote for her. So Rishi Sunak got 137 MPs backing him, who were probably, real supporters. They weren't necessarily after jobs or whatever. They were genuine supporters. Liz Truss got 113. So she came behind Rishi Sunak, and Penny Mordaunt got over 100 votes.
Yes.
So that shows the split within the party about their preferred candidate. Those 100 votes for Penny Mordaunt seems to have empowered her to come out and be critical already as a cabinet minister of Liz Truss's policies. She doesn't like the idea of benefits not being uprated in line with inflation. So not only have you got rebellion on the backbenches, you've also got rebellions going on within the cabinet. So there are a lot of people out there to calm down.
And interestingly, perhaps as a function of being in one form or other in government for 12 years, you've got a lot of operators on the back benches. I think, by my count, 5 former chief whips now not in the cabinet, on the back benches, the Gavin Williamsons, the Mark Harpers, indeed the Michael Goves of this world, who perhaps may well be said to be organising against this government.
You could see it at this conference that Michael Gove has become the leader of the opposition here, and you see him around the fringes, that he's been openly critical, and you're absolutely right that one of the mistakes Liz Truss made was not to have a broad church in cabinet. Just bringing in your own supporters is not a great help. And you're talking about, you mentioned Grant Shapps, really experienced cabinet ministers now on the backbenches, very resentful for losing their jobs for no better reason than a new leader came along. Grant Shapps is probably the best communicator in government, and they've lost him. He will use those communication skills now to undermine the Prime Minister. And it's all those things, it's those mistakes that she made along the way. Had she included some of those people, she wouldn't be in the situation she is now.
Is there a counterfactual world where Liz Truss perhaps appointed a couple of senior Sunak backers to her cabinet, where the OBR report went alongside that mini budget, where Liz Truss is currently sailing along pretty comfortably in the polls? Or frankly, is that all too much wishful thinking? Is this fundamentally a function of what the party is right now, where the Conservative Party is? Of course, Boris Johnson saw issues with discipline. The 2019 intake are a lot more independent-minded than previous intakes. Indeed, their formative time in Parliament was during COVID, where they didn't have the normal induction to the whipping system that perhaps many MPs did in previous intakes. Is the Conservative Party, frankly, at this stage, ungovernable?
Well, it's ungovernable as we speak. It doesn't mean it can't be governed again. And this is what I mean about if she was able to take the right moves, hold up her hands and say, look, I made a mistake. It was a very difficult time to take over. She didn't get the chance to have her first week because the Queen died. That's not her fault, obviously. So everything had to be truncated into a final week of Parliament before we all came up to party conferences. So it wasn't an ideal beginning on timings anyway. She can use that argument, but I think that she needs a bit of mea culpa when she gets up on the stage. Say, yeah, okay, I accept it wasn't a good start. Let's reset. Let's start again. Let's see if we can make this go right. I'm not terribly optimistic, but it is a possibility.
Well, I suppose it's not long for us to wait to see exactly what she says on that stage. Nigel Nelson, thank you so much for joining us here on the briefing this morning. And indeed, we will be sticking with all the twists and turns of this party conference as it goes on. Do not go anywhere. Up next, it's Bev Turner with To The Point, and indeed stick through for that seismic first party conference speech from Liz Truss as Prime Minister. All that to come in the next few hours here on GB News, but first, it's the weather forecast.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A windy Wednesday and a wet start for many. Pretty mild out there this morning as well. Later on, we should see some brighter skies developing. But generally, it's a wet and windy start from this area of low pressure. It's been intensifying overnight, now crossing away from Scotland up towards the northern parts of the North Sea. But it's left behind a lot of wet weather this morning, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads, parts of the M6, the M8 in particular, but that rain is slipping south down across the Midlands now. After a dry start across eastern England, the rain will push in across Lincolnshire by lunchtime and then towards East Anglia and the southeast this afternoon. It will be clearing away from the south and from the northeast. Sunshine will follow, along with a whole raft of showers. It is blustery. It's quite mild out there this morning. Temperatures actually likely to be a bit lower this afternoon compared to this morning, generally in the mid-teens for England and Wales. 11 or 12 across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it'll feel colder because of the wind. A very blustery day then, staying pretty gusty overnight tonight. That rain will clear by late afternoon across East Anglia and the southeast, and then clear spells for most of England and Wales, but a lot of showers will keep coming in across Scotland and Northern Ireland. It will be a cooler night, certainly across the south. Temperatures down into single figures, staying at 9 or 10 across towns and cities further north, where there will still be a pretty strong wind blowing. A blustery day then on Thursday, not as windy